Okay, first of all, it is a huge honor to have been invited back again. Having listened to everybody else so far, to begin with, I was really, really grateful that I was not on first. I thought, oh, that's okay then. But now I have to follow these guys. And okay, so where to begin? Wicca, you may have heard Professor Asim drop the word witchcraft there. We like to say Wicca because less people go, because there is quite the history. My religion is called Wicca, and it has only been legal within the last 100 years. I wish that I had 5,000 years of scriptures to share with you. Unfortunately, my path had to go underground in the UK and throughout Europe and North America for a really long time. So it was dangerous to keep any kind of written documentation of what we did. We've got a whole bunch of media images of what a witch is, of what a pagan priest or priestess is. Some of it is verging on accurate. We have cauldrons, we have brooms, which we can't fly on, which I'm sad about because I'm on my 5th car this year. Not because I drive it like I stole it. I'm just very unlucky with technology. On that note, I have no presentation to put up here, no props, because I'm very clumsy and I'd probably take someone out with something. So anyhow, what I've been taught has mostly been given through word of mouth, through elders teaching neophytes and initiates. In the UK, Wicca became a thing round about the late 30s, early 40s, thanks to a Gerald Gardner. He met with some witches in the New Forest who had been operating, I keep saying the word underground because it makes it sound like some big secret society, but had been working together following the old religions of the UK for a number of years. They shared with him their Book of Shadows. Now, it's not like in Charmed. We can't open a Book of Shadows and produce a spell and give you some wonderful visual effects, but it contained bits and bobs that had somehow been held together. We are the magpies of the religious world. If you read about witchcraft, you'll see that we take a little bit from here and a little bit from there, a little bit from there, shamelessly stealing from all of your cultures, because we don't have much of our own. We can look at what the ancient Egyptians did, the Greeks, the Romans. They were all pagans. They all had many gods. They all used what we call magic, which is basically the shaping and working of energy. So I'm going to talk more about the cultural role of the witches, the pagans, the druids through the ages. This is something that is only now becoming a little bit more socially acceptable, a little bit more out there. But if we go back tens of thousands of years ago, back to a time when we don't have creature comforts, we don't have electricity, we don't have any of these wonderful things that we have now, the people relied solely on the benevolence of the earth to get them through. We had very little in the way of medical knowledge. So the idea of procreation basically involved a woman suddenly getting fat and creating life. So it stood to reason for the people of that time that we didn't have a father god, but more a mother goddess. In paganism, the idea of balance is very important. So if we're going to have a mother goddess, surely there must be a father god. Some people see them as separately. Some people see them as a polarity of one energy. This, in a similar way to the Hindus, some people will see as individual gods. Some people will see as a face of the divine, because it's easier for us to access. For me to go into the forest and stand in my sacred circle and call God is a pretty big thing. But for me to call Diana or Hecate or Aphrodite or one of the names that there is already an image, there is already a story for, I'm feeding into and from something that is already a tangible collection of energy, a tangible personality of the divine. So that, I hope, kind of explains the idea of divinity in paganism. But we're going back to when the people were living off the earth with no option of popping to Tesco's. People needed to rely on each other. People needed to work together. We have nowadays a massive, massive disconnect. We have so much technology, and going from the Industrial Revolution forward, people don't tend to get out there and get their hands dirty with the earth. The majority of people who are living a normal 9 to 5, I hate using the word normal, but who are using a traditional 9 to 5 job, if they're lucky, maybe they can plant some things in their garden. If they're lucky, they'll grow. They might have some tomatoes on their windowsill. But do they have any idea of what it's like to rely on those crops to get you through? Probably not. So we have to really use our imaginations to get back. If you're living in a privileged world, which in the Western world we really are at the moment, there's so much convenience. You might knock on your neighbour's door for a tin of tomatoes, but you're not relying on your neighbour to have your back to help get you through the winter so much. People would follow the cycle of the seasons because their lives depended on it. Today is, in my religion, a day called Beltane, and it is the first day of spring. It's the divine mating of the god and the goddess. It's a day of fertility, which I think is actually quite apt because of the amount of ideas and things that are being birthed in this room right now. So they would follow what the sun was doing. At this time, people would take out into the fields, they would have a Maypole. Now, a Maypole is used in quite a few traditions nowadays. For some of you, it may come as a surprise to learn that that was actually a big phallic symbol. And the idea of people dancing around the Maypole was really to encourage nature to get it on, okay? Which is important because if our crops are not fertile, if our animals are not fertile, then how are we going to get through? How are we going to make a harvest if the earth isn't fertile? So we would encourage the god and the goddess to be fertile. Okay. Then obviously people would come together for the harvests. We had 3 harvests. We had the harvest of the fruit, we had the harvest of the corn, and we had the harvest of the animals. Now, personally, I don't stick with the harvest of the animals because I follow a plant-based diet, because I'll get onto that in a second. But our harvest of the animals has become what many people know as Halloween, because it was a festival of the dead, because you are taking life. And because you were taking life, you would be honouring the dead and honouring the ancestors. We believe that the veil between our world and, some people call it heaven, some people call it Valhalla, the other world, where spirit exists in a more tangible form than it does here. We believe that on particular days, for example, Beltane and Samhain or Halloween, is thinner on those days. And so we would use those days to ask the ancestors for guidance. And to give thanks. The ancestors played a massive, massive role, because when we're going back to a time when we weren't writing things down, when the average person couldn't put pen to paper, everything was word of law. Everything was brought from campfire to campfire by storytellers, by bards. And that is the only way that we've managed to keep some of our most ancient tradition, is through the listening to elders. So when it comes to Wicca or witchcraft and state, there's a sketchy history there. However, we can't focus what we're doing now on what has happened through history. Pretty much every religious group in this room or across the world has at some point had a pop at each other. I'm proud to say, as far as I know, pagans are no longer throwing Christians to the lions. I'm standing here without the fear of being burned or hanged. It's a fairly glorious, yet, it's a fairly glorious time to live in. So it's going forward, and it's bringing the things that our cultures and our heritages have taught us and bringing them together. We don't have many temples. We have a goddess temple in Glastonbury. We have bits and bobs, but most of our places have either been built on by other cultures or just cease to exist. So we make our sacred spaces, again, similar to the Hindus, where we need them. We'll go out to a quiet place in the forest where we can wear robes and people aren't going to mistake us for the KKK, because that has happened. Traditionally, we may wear a long robe. Sometimes they will be white, and that does tend to give off a bit of a scary image. And we will make our sacred space there. In traditional witchcraft, we work sky-clad. Sky-clad basically means naked, clad only by the sky. In this climate, that's not so easy to do outside. So we tend to work indoors when we're going to do that. And there is a very, very valid reason when it comes to our culture that we do that. And it is absolutely nothing sexual. When we get dressed, we are putting on our status, we're putting on our ego, we're putting on trinkets and things that tie us to the material world. When you're standing in circle and you're communicating with your gods, you are standing there as a child of the gods, completely perfect as they made you. So to achieve that complete lack of ego, the stripping away of everything that you have on, is a really, really, really fantastic tool. Not only that, it helps you to connect with the people around you, because, again, you are there laid bare with no ego. There is nothing there to get in the way of people just... It is quite hard to be like, oh, I'm very important when you're butt naked, you know? Again, this is something that we tend to do in the privacy of our own circles. But when we talk about being naked on our rights, we're not necessarily talking about clothes. We're talking about being able to strip away those things that are tying us to convention, to the material world. We want to achieve something in Circle called group mind. When the people would come together and drum up the crops, when they would be there, everybody either banging their feet or drumming, they are sending out a message. They are sending out a rhythm, okay? They need to have a connection. They need to have a harmony with the people around them. And that is much easier to do when you aren't focusing on anything external, like rearranging your anything, okay? Drumming and rhythm and harmony is something that is utilized when we are creating magic. It is a way of getting in touch with the universe. Sound is so incredibly powerful. I know I was not the only person moved listening to our Baha'i ladies singing. Sound touches us in such a special way, whether it's hearing an old song that you know and kind of all of a sudden you're 13 and crying over your first broken heart again, or whether it's listening to the sea or the storm. There's something primordial about sound, about that heartbeat of the universe, the tides. And when we make harmony with our voices, then we are touching something deep that allows us to connect. If I were to give every person in this room a drum, some of you may be appalling musicians like myself, and tell you to just hit it with no particular rhythm, after a couple of minutes you would find that you were all beating to the same rhythm, because that is what humanity is. We want to be in harmony. When you strip away the ego and the culture and all of these things, people want to connect with people. And that has to begin with yourself. So when it comes to the relationship between Wicca and state, it's got to start internally. It's got to start with yourself. We have various trappings. We do have wands. We do. And we have robes sometimes. Like I said, sometimes we'll use a cauldron. But when it comes down to it, your biggest working tool for any kind of work that you do, for any kind of prayer, incense is lovely, candles are lovely, but it's you. You are the conduit. You are the gateway to being able to communicate with that which is bigger than yourself. So you need to be in harmony with yourself. Sometimes that is the scariest thing that we can do, to be able to stand there and look at ourselves and say, am I in harmony with myself? Because only when we begin to do that can we begin to find harmony with other people. If we acknowledge that every one of us carries the spark of divine inside us. Aleister Crowley, phenomenal magician, as a man was a bit of a nightmare. But Aleister Crowley says in his Book of the Law, every man and woman is a star. And that is something that I always go back to when I'm thinking about it, because sometimes the world seems a little bit overwhelming, and sometimes the bad things seem a little bit too bad, and sometimes you feel powerless to be able to do stuff. But when you remember that you are part of that every single one of us has at some point climbed out of that primordial gloop and has ended up formed the way you are, you understand that you're no less and no more than the person next to you. And when you see the person next to you like that, you'll find it's very difficult to mistreat them. It's very difficult to not harmonize with them. Hold on, I did make notes. Right, so when we're talking about harmony and vibrations, every single person has their own vibration, okay? We're all working on our own levels. Sometimes people will have a slightly higher or slightly lower vibration to you. But in the same way as if you're all drumming, you're going to end up drumming to the same rhythm, you will affect each other's vibrations. Everybody has that one friend who is always a bit, yeah? And no matter what kind of mood you're in, they might come in and all of a sudden the vibration of the room lowers. You're just exhausted by them being there. Likewise, you'll know some people who bounce into a room and they're like, that's because you're altering each other's vibrations. So if we work on being conscious of our own vibration, then we will be in harmony with the people around us. If you vibrate at a good frequency, you are going to raise the vibrations of those around you. You can do that without draining yourself, without being exhausted. You just focus on being the change, yeah? That's a very common thing that you hear at the moment, be the change, but it really is. It really is. I'm picturing now your props and the state being up here and the people being down here, and absolutely. But we've got to look at ripples. We've got to look at the way that, bless you, to get those two hoops together, it can seem like quite a daunting task. But every single person is creating ripples with every little thing they do. And if you are sending out those positive ripples and you are vibrating on a nice frequency, then that is how we're going to achieve togetherness with everybody else. Wait, there was another thing that was there and it's gone. I've had a lot of coffee, so please excuse me, because at the moment my mind is going all over the place. And I'm terrible at following notes. I did write some and they've all gone. Cats. I've written cats in my book. The reason I've written cats in my book is because doctors and scientists, I like to say scientists because it makes it sound very valid, have recently started telling us that actually it's very good for your mental health to stroke a cat. I don't like to be eccentric, but I have 8 cats, and my mental health is right up there. They purr, they vibrate, they calm you, okay? When people think about modern-day witches, your mind's going to probably go to one of two places. You're going to be straight there with the, these are scary, awful, unwholesome people who run around naked, or you're going to think of tree-hugging hippy-dippies with their crystals. Really, we're a combination of all of those. And the same as in your cultures, we'll have people who are into different things. It's going to be the same in mine. But crystals, we do use for a very specific reason. Each crystal has a particular vibration. And by carrying a crystal that has a particular vibration, you are going to alter your own vibration. For example, today I am covered in lapis lazuli. 1, because it's pretty and I like it, but 2, because it correlates with the throat chakra. I'm getting kicked off. 2 minutes. 2, because it correlates with the throat chakra. So I am trying to influence the vibration of my throat chakra to help me to effectively communicate and not get myself tied in knots, because I'm a very nervous speaker. So really, with my 2 minutes, to sum up, we need to get back to basics, like's already been said. We no longer need to go and build a big fire and come together and drum in the spring. We now no longer need to jump fires together and things like that. But we need to get closer to doing that again. We need to turn off our laptops. We need to be able to vibrate with people, to harmonize with people. And you can't do that if you're locking yourself away. we have a piece of literature called The Charge of the Goddess, which I've written a copy of in the paper. I'm feeling a bit bad. Mine was only 7 pages. But I've written a copy of The Charge of the Goddess, but the ultimate words in there say, if that which thou seekest thou findest not within thyself, thou wilt never find it without. For behold, I have been with thee from the beginning, and I'm that which is attained at the end of desire. So you've got to start being the change yourself and raise those vibrations. And that's it, I'm done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.